This is podcast 3, and it relates to coding in the Manchester context and the evolution of an approach to enthusing Manchester writers in particular about coding. I have a small coding background myself, having studied coding at Salford University, primarily scientific coding languages, Fortran alcohol. I also studied a little bit of HTML, did a few courses on that, and I came across Twine while investigating digital literature, and I've self-taught myself, and I have a rudimentary understanding of Twine. So as part of the project, one of the things that we were hoping to do was introduce Manchester writers to Twine storytelling language. And we tried in many ways, but let's face it, coding is not everybody's cup of tea. And sometimes introducing writers to coding makes me feel they think that it's like mixing cement or visiting the dentist. It's something that you do if you have to, but you really don't want to do it unless it's absolutely necessary. And so I tried to think of a different way of getting them to engage with coding and Twine as part of the development of literature stories. And what I decided to do was to eliminate the word coding and simply ask the writers whether they could create stories which had branches based on choices. And within that, I decided to provide them with a very simple architecture. They should begin the story early with one choice, and then they could branch out from that choice, and they could have a maximum of 8 endings. And that's all they had to remember, give your character, your main character choices, and have the choices lead to consequences. And by the end of your evolution of the story, let there be maximum 8 endings. You can write it in the second person you, if you can. That will help the coding, but it's not necessary. So it worked marvelously well. The writers were no longer intimidated by the prospect of doing the Twine code work themselves. Maybe it worked too well. I got all kinds of architectures back in the writer's first drafts, and a multitude of ways of telling me where the branches started, where they went, in the writer's own notes to me about how I might be able to get it all coded up. Some writers even created loops and counting subroutines, and it took me quite a lot of time to work out what any individual writer's intention was. Then after that, I would work on the editing of the stories in the conventional literary way, to make the story read as best as possible as literature, and try to make sure that the structure of the literary beginning, middle, end, that kind of thing, insofar as it's valid when you're dealing with the Twine games, worked well. So what were the problems? I got some brilliant stories back. Some I felt delayed the first choice that the user would have to make for too long, and others wrote me stories which were 5 times the length that I'd actually requested. So optimizing those stories was a learning curve for me. It was really something that I learned by doing. And for this research and development project, I decided that let me not go back to them with issues around coding. This was a time to emphasize story over game. And my thought was that if I can get the writers to feel proud of the stories, to feel that the stories are really working, and to feel good about that as a first achievement in terms of Twine literature narratives, then they would become more ambitious, and they would start to create more complex Twine-based stories. So small steps lead on to something bigger was my strategy. And we'll see if that's worked. So far, I'm very happy with the stories, but they haven't yet been coded. So let's see.